we celebrate MLK Day. And due to some scheduling issues, I cannot do the live stream at 7 and 8 o'clock. 7 o'clock is going to be a live stream lecture about Martin Luther King, and then 8 o'clock is a Q&A about for members only. So I will be rescheduling the members only Q&A for later in the month. We will do that once a month for members. But for today, we are doing the live stream lecture on MLK from now until about 6:45 or so. So we've got about 20 minutes or so to talk about the life and legacy of Martin Luther King, one of the most important people who ever lived. And of course, probably the most important civil rights leader in American history. So we're going a little bit early. And that's because we can't do 7 o'clock, and we won't be doing our members Q&A afterwards. That will have to follow next week at some time. So, or the week after. So we'll see. So the members only live stream will be next week. Our regular live stream lecture is today. We were going to do it at 7 o'clock, and it was going to be about MLK, but I'm on the road and I've got a couple of things that have come up, so I'm just going to do it now with all of you. So that's one way that I can still do the live stream. We did this before with Hanukkah and the story about that. So if you're new, welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where we take history and talk about it in a friendly, neighborly manner, 24/7, 365 or 366 days a year. And today is our live stream lecture on this MLK Day about the life and legacy of Dr. King, one of the most important people in world history, and obviously probably the most important civil rights leader in all of American history. And I'm going to talk about his life and his legacy a little bit. We've only got about 20 minutes or so, so it's going to be a quicker live stream than usual. I'm not able to see the chat that well because I'm driving right now. So if you hear background noise, it's cars, it's traffic, it's all of that good stuff. But please like and subscribe and become a Friendly Neighborhood Historian. It's as easy as all of that. A very happy Monday to all of you. I hope you have had a really good MLK Day weekend, and that, that you're enjoying your day off maybe, or you're getting off of work and joining us here. We really appreciate it as always. Or if you're watching this later, please don't forget to give a like and subscribe. And hearts, if you can put the video of MLK, the history video I have of him on the channel, that would be extremely important. So obviously, Martin Luther King is born in 1929, and the holiday that celebrates his life and legacy is based around his birthday. His birthday is, I think, January 15th. So basically, it kind of falls around the third Monday in January. So in 1986, President Ronald Reagan made it a national holiday. It had already been celebrated on a federal level for some time, starting with Gerald Ford in the 1970s. But in 1986, it was celebrated for the first time on January 18th. And of course, was being celebrated the third Monday in January. It's celebrated today. So it's obviously commemorating the life and legacy of Dr. King. So Martin Luther King was born in 1929 in Georgia. His father was the pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, and this is obviously where King grew up and learned about oratory, preaching, and the cause for civil rights and social justice, which would be a huge part of his legacy. Now, when many people talk about Martin Luther King and everything he did, most people are focusing, of course, on his legacy with civil rights and what he did for African Americans, helping them gain full equality before the law and all of that stuff. But what a lot of people don't focus on is the fact that Martin Luther King's civil rights movement was in many ways a gateway to the civil rights movements of other organizations and groups, be they Hispanic. The feminist movement was obviously inspired by it. The LGBTQ movement, Native Americans, senior citizens, peoples with disabilities, their movements were all inspired by the social justice ethic and the nonviolence motif of Martin Luther King's wing, the most successful wing and the most prominent wing of the civil rights movement. Now, the civil rights movement had been kind of dormant in American history since the 1870s. The Union had obviously won the Civil War and occupied the South, trying to effect some sort of rights for African Americans through a process known as Reconstruction. Reconstruction was not successful, and the main reason that Reconstruction was not successful is that Southerners did not want to comply, and the Democratic Party in the South, later known as the Dixiecrats, had a monopoly on white racism. Not a monopoly, but had a complete system dedicated to white racism. The Ku Klux Klan was very powerful and popular in the South, and terrorizing into blacks, segregating them, discriminating against second-class citizens was a huge of the 19th and the beginning allowed for separate but equal facilities that were always separate but never equal, disenfranchising and disaffecting African Americans more and more. They were limited in their political power, their social power, their economic power. Many of them started moving north in the 1910s and 20s to seek better lives, creating neighborhoods in cities like Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, Detroit, in order to have a better life. So this is quite common. And I can't help the internet because I'm driving, so yeah. And I am indeed driving, and there will be no crashing. I am a good driver. But anyways, so, and I want to set up my microphone, but I am charging my phone at the moment. Let me see here. I'm going to fuddle around for that. I don't want to crash. Anyways, so if you're just joining us, this is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. Usually we'd be in studio, but I'm on the road, and I'm not able to start at 7 p.m. like I promised, so I'm starting earlier and doing my live stream lecture about Martin Luther King on the day we celebrate him. So please like and subscribe, become a Friendly Neighborhood Historian. It's as easy as all of that. So, King grows up. His father's the pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, a great orator and a member of a civil rights community, which had obviously been promoted through the NAACP, started by W.E.B. Du Bois. Booker T. Washington created an entire line of African Americans bettering themselves, receiving educational and economic opportunities. So there were more and more opportunities for blacks in the South, and especially in the North. And there was a growing call for civil rights. Discrimination was rampant in the U.S. military. The federal government was discriminated in the 1910s under Woodrow Wilson. Yes, I said the boogeyman Woodrow Wilson because everybody here hates him for some reason. Well, maybe for good reason. But yeah, there was a lot going on in the South in the 1910s and 1920s, and there was a lot of movement of African Americans to the North. But those who remained in the South still dealt with heavy discrimination, and the racism wasn't much better in the North than it had been in the South anyways, in many of the major metropolises, which were already populated by immigrant groups which were leery and weary of African Americans moving into their neighborhoods and taking their jobs. So discrimination was rampant all throughout the country. This was a very racist time all throughout the world, and in the United States in particular. So where does King is educated I believe, I'm trying to remember where he got his theological degree. It might be from Union Theological Seminary in Chicago. King is educated in the North, where he receives his theological training and becomes a pastor. He is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King for a reason. He receives a Master of Divinity and a doctorate, and becomes a preacher at the Ebenezer Baptist Church, following in his father's footsteps. And during his time in his studies, he encounters the writings and ideas of Mohandas Gandhi, the Indian civil rights and independence leader, who through a series of nonviolent protests and calls for freedom had been able to secure much of the freedoms that he desired from the Indian people, from the British Empire, proving that nonviolence and civil disobedience were much easier ways of actually achieving and affecting real change in the world, rather than violent revolution, radical ideology, things like that. Now, many people on the American right during and after his lifetime have tried to paint King as a communist. King had associations with many communist and socialistic figures, but King was not a communist. He did not believe in violent revolution, mass redistribution of land, or seizing the means of production by whatever means necessary. King did believe in social justice and in setting the record straight after everything had gone awry because of discrimination, slavery, segregation, and racism. So King's message that he got from Gandhi was one of civil disobedience and believing in peaceful demonstration and protest being much more effective. If you are terrorized and mistreated, you do not fight back, you turn the other cheek, and this allows people in the public to see that you are fighting peacefully and trying to get something good, and see that everybody else is mistreating you, and it's easy to see who is good and who is evil if you are handling things this way. This was a huge part of Martin Luther King's ethos, a huge part that he got from Henry David Thoreau, the American writer and humanist from the 19th century, and also from Gandhi. So King's rise in the civil rights movement comes from his oratory, his participation with the and efforts like that, and the civil rights strides in education, in desegregating, and of course also desegregating the military. going to become a major fixture in all of it, even organization, the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference or Convention, which will be devoted to promoting civil rights for African Americans all throughout the South. King's rise to prominence really hits its stride in 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama, when the bus boycotts start. The Montgomery bus boycotts are caused because of Rosa Parks, an African-American woman who, because of segregation laws, is forced to sit at the back of the bus if her seat is needed by a white person. Parks refuses to do so and is arrested, bringing national attention to the cause of desegregating the bus and not forcing African-Americans to sit in the back. King organizes protests and civil disobedience, and this is how King rises to prominence and becomes one of the main leaders of the civil rights movement in the mid-1950s. Already there was achievements such as the Brown versus the Board of Education, which officially desegregated the schools, and in 1956 the Supreme Court rules that the buses should be desegregated. So desegregation rulings are happening. The military was desegregated by Harry Truman back in 1947. So progress is being made, but King is really going to become the centrifugal force in affecting progress and change. He's going to continually use both his incredible oratory skills, appealing to the Bible, to Christian ethics, and to church history as a way to promote civil rights and freedoms and opportunities for African Americans. His basic idea and argument is that that by preaching and using a Christian ethos, he will gain legitimacy for the movement and gain legitimacy for their claims, and their claims will eventually be efficacious. This is the whole center of King's entire argument and rationale. Let's see what happens next. King's personal life, a little bit about that. He marries Coretta Scott, and they have several children together. Now, a lot of people like to point this out, and it becomes kind of the juicy element later. King is seen as a potential communist, or as somebody who is associated with communists, so he's seen as a danger by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and even the Department of Justice, and his phone is tapped. There's surveillance and spies keeping information about King, and King's personal failures are a matter of public record and on display, as many investigations by the government were made into King during and after his life. King's philandering is well known. He was not faithful to Coretta and had many different affairs, and there are recordings of him talking with women that he was sleeping with who was not his wife. In fact, the night before he was killed, supposedly he had a liaison with one such woman. Now, how much of this is exaggerated and how much of this is mythological is up for debate, but it is a pretty well-established fact that King was not loyal or faithful to his wife throughout their entire marriage. They did have several children, and Coretta remained a constant supporter of both King and his efforts at civil rights and desegregation. King and his protesters were often exposed during their peaceful demonstrations to all sorts of torturous treatment, of course being attacked, having dogs, fire hoses turned on them, white counter-protesters beating them up, attacking them, spitting on them, cursing at them, all sorts of horrible things. The bombing of the First Baptist Church in Birmingham doesn't affect King directly, but is an example of white supremacist violence against African Americans. 5 young girls are killed in that in 1961. In 1963, a civil rights leader named Medgar Evers is killed while trying to bring attention to the cause. But the whole point is that King, despite the frustration that this causes with many of the leaders of the civil rights movement, including Malcolm X, who believes that only violent upheaval will actually gain them their civil rights, King continues to preach the laws of civil disobedience and proper protest. He believes that it is morally right to disobey unjust laws, and so he encourages African Americans to disobey segregation laws. This inspires things like sit-ins, freedom rides, and all sorts of things that eventually lead to the desegregation of public places and buses and bus terminals and things like that. So King's efforts to desegregate public facilities includes disobeying segregation. And again, this sets him at odds with some civil rights more aggressive. In many ways, it sets him apart from a lot of civil rights in the present who have called for more violent action. So these are all. So King has an entire motif and an entire style that is the most predominant and popular. It is hard to argue with because it is peaceful. It is hard to not have pity on them when you see the oppression that they go through, especially suffering injustices when they are simply trying to protest for their rights and freedoms. So, yeah, King's efforts at civil protest and disobedience will eventually render him winning the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. His big moment, however, is on the horizon, and we've only got about 5 or 10 minutes left, so I encourage you to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Again, we're on the road today, so we don't have as the equipment and the usual accoutrements that we have here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, but we've got tons of live streams and content available for you. I'm going to be a little bit busy later on, so I can't do the live stream lecture like I wanted to at 7 p.m., but I still wanted to give you something today. So King has a couple of decisive things happen in 1963. He has worked with the Eisenhower administration in promoting civil rights, and the Eisenhower administration was tacitly in support of civil rights. The Kennedy administration is walking a fine line, needing support of Southern Democrats to continue King to help him get reelected in 1964. But Kennedy is very sympathetic to civil rights and has championed civil rights and likes King. And despite his DOJ targeting King, Kennedy has a public affinity for King and wants King's programs to work. King is arrested in 1963, and it is in jail, the Birmingham jail, indeed, where he writes his famous letter from a Birmingham jail, encouraging people to civilly disobey unjust laws, and basically lays out his motive that this is what a good Christian pastor should do in promoting social justice and equality and fighting for equal rights between African Americans and other Americans, particularly whites. King's shining moment, probably his most famous moment, comes on August 28th, 1963, in a huge civil rights march in Washington, D.C. The March on Washington has hundreds of thousands of participants, dozens of speakers, and of course is highlighted by King's speech, which is probably the most famous speech in American history, not given by a U.S. president, and maybe still the most famous speech overall. And it's "I Have a Dream," King declaring that he believes that that he wants people to be judged on the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. He believes that one day America will be a place where in the Deep South, African Americans and white people will be able to enjoy a meal together, live together peacefully, and help one another out. This is the core central message of King's arguments, and these arguments have gained a lot of legitimacy, a lot of public support by both whites and blacks, and are starting to gain political power and backing. In 1964, the same year he wins the Nobel Peace Prize, Lyndon Johnson, who has succeeded Kennedy after he was shot, signs the Civil Rights Act. He backs it up with the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and another Civil Rights Act in 1968. So there are several major changes. This ends the poll tax, this ends segregation based and any barriers that would keep African Americans from voting in the South. It creates black majority congressional districts to give them representation. It ends segregation and discrimination in all public facilities and bars governments from ever denying people access to resources or facilities because of the color of their skin. So it ends public, open, systematic segregation by federal, state, and local governments, and despite many protestations from the South, is successful in breaking the power of the segregationists in the South, who continue to fight back against King and his followers in some of the most barbarous ways possible, and all of a sudden there's a huge breakthrough. There's now an ability to basically have more opportunities for African Americans to access public facilities that they have been denied previously, and there's further racial harmony and equality. And the welfare state created by Lyndon Johnson is targeted. I wanted to finish talking about Martin Luther King. So I don't know what the last thing you heard me say was, but King is basically heavily focused on dealing with the the issues of not just racial discrimination, but poverty, calling for the end of the Vietnam War, and other stuff. So King has kind of changed his focus from the racial issues. Those are kind of secondary and implied, but his primary issues are dealing with the inequality of the poor. In 1968, he is planning another march on Washington, this time to advocate for economic and social justice, which are huge aspects of his philosophy, and he believes are not being addressed properly. King has undergone criticism from more radical elements of the civil rights movement who believe that his nonviolence has been successful in some things, but has not led to huge systematic change. Ironically, after King's death, violence will be the answer, as riots will break out in places like Memphis, Detroit, and Los Angeles, all racially motivated throughout the summer of 1968. And that leads us to the final act of King's life. King is encouraging the Memphis, I forget which, it's not buses, it's, I'm trying to remember, the sanitation workers. The sanitation workers are protesting and striking in Memphis, and King goes there in the beginning of April of 1968 to speak to them, to encourage them to continue their fight. He's very pro-union, he's very pro-workers' rights. And on April 4th, he gives an extremely famous speech that seems to be full of prescience and his own knowledge of his soon to be demise, where he speaks at the Baptist church there. I'm trying to remember the name of the church. And he says famously, I have been to the mountaintop. I have seen, let me see, I can actually do a background now because I'm finally stopped for a couple of minutes at least. Can I find a background of Dr. King? Let's see here. That would be nice if I could actually put a background of Dr. King up here. Let's see. We're almost done anyways, but King gives this extremely famous speech, and it's called I've been to the mountaintop. Now, this is probably a speech you've heard of before or seen clips of, and just like I Have a Dream speech, you see King's passion, you see his ability, his incredible rhetoric, his ability to speak clearly and precisely, and his ability to appeal to biblical language and biblical, logical, and spiritual language to prove a and racial injustices, something that King had focused on again a long period throughout his life. Um, so let's hear Martin Luther King. Where is he? Okay, so King is in the midst of a crazy year. 1968 is crazy for many Americans in many ways. There we are. And so he's giving this speech. It's one of his most famous speeches, and he famously says he compares himself to the biblical character of Moses, who dies before the Israelites go into the Promised Land. He says, "I may not get there with you, but I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen the other side, and I might not, and I may not get there with you. I want to live a long life. Longevity it gives you chills when you listen to it. I encourage you to go listen to it. That longevity is something that everybody would want to have, but it may not be for him. He just wants to do what God wants him to do. He sees himself as this Moses like figure who has brought his people so far, and yet he may not get there with everybody else. And then he famously says, uh, it doesn't matter because mine eyes have seen the coming of the glory of the Lord, the quote from the famous um, Battle Hymn of the Republic, which is a reference to John Brown, the abolitionist and civil rights fighter from the 19th century. The next morning, King is leaving the Lorraine Motel, which is now the site of the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee, and he is shot and killed. Now, the official story, and I tend to believe it, is that James Earl Ray, a racist who hated King, is responsible for murdering him, although some people have claimed that he is a patsy. And just like the death of JFK, King was killed by the government. Some people believe the FBI did it or the Johnson administration because of King's turning against the Vietnam War. All the evidence seems to suggest, even the releasing of the MLK files last year, that King was killed by James Earl Ray. Ray would live out the rest of his life in prison and protest his own innocence, although the evidence seems to point towards him being the killer. So King was only 39 years old. He left behind a wife and young children.